Coming live from the studio, this is All Sports with Gerardo. Thank you for watching another episode of All Sports. This is your host Gerardo, and all I talk is sports. On the show today, I am going to talk about NFL football, Major League Baseball, NBA basketball, and Nhl Hockey. Before I start the show, I hope you all had a great week. To start off with Major League Baseball, so right now I'm going to update you with the current schedule for the Rockies. I'm going to tell you every team the Rockies went up against in the last week and the final scores of those games. And I'm also going to tell you who the Rockies go up against in the next week. So if we take a look at the Rockies schedule, this is the final stretch of the 2020 regular season. Now that we are in September, for the Rockies and for the rest of the baseball teams, this is the most important part of their schedule. Now is when you want to win games and not lose games, especially if you're a team that is contending for the playoffs. You cannot afford to lose games in the final weeks of the regular season. So now that we are in September, the Rockies definitely want to win games because they are trying to compete for one of the playoff spots in the National League. So to start off, this past weekend, the Rockies started their road trip down in Los Angeles, and they had a 3-game series against the Dodgers. In the first game, the Rockies lost the game 10-6. In the second game, the Rockies won the game 5-2. And in the final game of the series, the Rockies won the game 7-6. So overall, the Rockies were able to win a series which they haven't done in a while. But also, they were able to beat the Dodgers and win a series in Los Angeles, which they have not done for a while. And with the Rockies competing for a playoff spot, this was a team they needed to beat. So it was just great to see that the Rockies were finally able to win in Los Angeles. The Rockies continued their road trip down to San Diego, and they had a 3-game series against the Padres during the week. In the first game of the series, the Rockies lost a close game 1-0. In the second game of the series, the Rockies lost the game 14-5. And in the final game of the series, the Rockies lost the game 5-3. So overall, the Rockies did get swept by the Padres, and they were not able to win any of the games against the Padres. With the Rockies being able to beat the Dodgers, it seemed like the Rockies were going to be able to beat the Padres, but they were not able to win any more games on this road trip. Now the Rockies return back to Coors Field this weekend for their next homestand, which will likely be the final homestand for the 2020 season for the Rockies. So in the final homestand in the 2020 season, this weekend, the Rockies have an interleague matchup, and they go against the Angels in a 3-game series here at Coors Field. And then next week, the Rockies will have another interleague matchup, and they will go against the Athletics in a 2-game series. So hopefully, in the final games of the 2020 season, the Rockies can win some games, because they are contending for one of the last playoff spots. And if they can win some games with the expanded playoffs for the 2020 season, the Rockies have a great chance at making it into the playoffs. But they have to win games, and if they're not going to win games, they're not going to make it into the playoffs for the 2020 season. So that's the current schedule for the Rockies. That's the teams the Rockies went up against in the last week, and that's the final scores of those games. And that's also who the Rockies go up against in the next week. So right now I'm going to update you with the current Major League Baseball standings in the American and National League. So if we take a look at the standings, now that we're in September, which is the final month for the regular season, we're going to take a look at the postseason standings in both the American League and in the National League. So for the 2020 season, since it was a 60-game season, Major League Baseball decided that they would expand the playoffs, and now 8 teams from the American and National League will make the playoffs, which is a total of 16 teams that are going to make the playoffs. So this includes your typical division winner, which is the first place team in each division, but also the second place team in each division also makes the playoffs, and you have 2 wild card teams. So if we take a look at the American League standings, here are the top 8 teams that would make the playoffs as of right now. The Rays have the number 1 seed. The Athletics have the number 2 seed. The White Sox have the number 3 seed. The Indians have the number 4 seed. The Blue Jays have the number 5 seed. The Astros have the number 6 seed. The Twins have the number 7 seed. And the Yankees have the number 8 seed. Some other teams that are also contending for the playoffs in the American League includes the Orioles, the Tigers, and the Mariners. Now taking a look at the National League, here are the top 8 teams that would make the playoffs in the National League. The Dodgers have the number 1 seed. The Braves have the number 2 seed. The Cubs have the number 3 seed. The Padres have the number 4 seed. The Phillies have the number 5 seed. The Cardinals have the number 6 seed. The Giants have the number 7 seed. And the Marlins have the number 8 seed. Some other teams that are contending for the playoffs in the National League includes the Rockies, the Brewers, the Mets, and the Reds. So that is the current postseason standings for both the American League and for the National League. As of right now, those would be the teams that would make the playoffs in both leagues. But with there being a few weeks left before the end of the regular season at the end of September, these postseason standings in both the American and National League can definitely change. We're going to have to wait and see what happens. But in the 2020 season, more teams are definitely going to make the playoffs with the expanded playoffs for the 2020 season. We're just going to have to wait and see what 8 teams in the American and National League make the playoffs. So that's the current Major League Baseball standings in the American and National League. In the Major League Baseball power rankings, the current top 10 Major League Baseball teams are the Dodgers, Rays, Athletics, Padres, White Sox, Twins, Indians, Braves, Cubs, and Yankees. Moving on now to NFL football, Deshaun Watson and the Texans have agreed to a 4-year contract extension. DeAndre Hopkins and the Cardinals have agreed to a 2-year contract extension. Adrian Peterson and the Lions have agreed to a 1-year contract. Jadeveon Clowney and the Titans have agreed to a 1-year contract. Leonard Fournette and the Buccaneers have agreed to a 1-year contract. Kareem Hunt and the Browns have agreed to a 2-year contract extension. Keenan Allen and the Chargers have agreed to a 4-year contract extension. Jalen Ramsey and the Rams have agreed to a 5-year contract. Jalen Ramsey's contract is the largest contract signed by a cornerback. Josh Gordon and the Seahawks have agreed to a 1-year contract. Linebacker Mark Barron and the Broncos have agreed to a 1-year contract. Cornerback Trey Devias White and the Bills have agreed to a 4-year contract extension. Running back Joe Mixon and the Bengals have agreed to a 4-year contract extension. Offensive tackle Taylor Decker and the Lions have agreed to a 6-year contract extension. Center Ryan Kelly and the Colts have agreed to a 4-year contract extension. Defensive tackle Cam Hayward and the Steelers have agreed to a 4-year contract extension. Dustin Colquitt and the Steelers have agreed to a 1-year contract. The Eagles are signing Josh McCown to their practice squad, and he will be the oldest practice squad player in NFL history. Head coach Andy Reid and the Chiefs have agreed to a new 6-year contract. General manager Brent Veach and the Chiefs have agreed to a new 6-year contract. The Jaguars traded defensive end Nhl Hockey to the Vikings in exchange for a 2021 second-round draft pick and a 2022 conditional 5th-round draft pick. The Raiders traded a 2021 4th-round draft pick to the Dolphins in exchange for linebacker Raekwon McMillan and a 2021 5th-round draft pick. The Broncos traded cornerback Isaac Yeoman to the Giants in exchange for a 7th-round draft pick. The Browns traded a 5th-round draft pick to the Jaguars in exchange for safety Ronnie Harrison. The Broncos released Todd Davis. After playing 12 seasons, Aqib Talib announced he is retiring from the NFL. Von Miller suffered an ankle injury at the end of practice on Tuesday, September 8th. His ankle injury will need surgery, and he will be out for the entire 2020 season. So this is not going to be great for the Broncos, not having Von Miller for either the entire season or most of the season. Even before the season started, the Broncos already lost Von Miller, likely for the entire 2020 season. So we're going to have to wait and see who replaces Von Miller. And it's definitely going to be different at that position and on the defense, with the Broncos not having Von Miller. Now, depending on how the backup players play at that position for the Broncos in their first regular season game, that is going to determine if one of those players are going to play at that position for the rest of the season, or are the Broncos going to go out and sign a free agent. We're going to have to wait and see. The Broncos are definitely exploring all their options, and they are definitely looking at the available players that are on the market that could possibly replace Von Miller. Now, depending on how the Broncos-Titans game goes and who plays at that position, that will determine, will that backup player play at that position, or are the Broncos going to sign a player that's on the market? We're just going to have to wait and see. But with Von Miller not playing at that position for the Broncos on defense this season, it's definitely going to be different, and the defense is definitely going to be different without Von Miller. The Broncos hired Emily Zeller to be their first full-time female coach in Broncos history. The 2020 season begins this week. The Chiefs-Texans game on Thursday, September 10th, will kick off the 2020 season. The Broncos season opener is against the Titans here in Denver at Empower Field at Mile High on Monday, September 14th. This is the first week of NFL football. So now that it's September, you know what time it is? It is now time for the NFL season to begin. And this week is the beginning of the 2020 NFL season. Now, with the 2020 season, it's definitely going to be different compared to seasons from the past. Now, there will be a few teams that will have fans in the stands for their home games. And there's also going to be some teams that don't have fans in the stands for most of the season or the entire season. For the first few weeks of the 2020 season, some teams that are going to allow fans in the stands at their home games will not have fans in the stands for their first few games. But after some of the first few games passed, then some of the teams that are going to allow fans in the stands will have fans in the stands for their home games later on this season. Now we'll have to wait and see what teams are going to allow fans in the stands for their home games. But no matter if it's a team that's allowing fans in the stands or it's a team that is not allowing fans in the stands. There's no doubt that this 2020 season is going to definitely be different. Even with the teams that are allowing fans in the stands, it's not going to be a full or sold out stadium. It's only going to be a few thousand fans. So we're going to have to wait and see how this 2020 NFL season is going to play out. There's no doubt that it's definitely going to be different. But it's definitely going to be a great and exciting 2020 NFL season, especially for certain teams that made many moves throughout this past offseason to improve their team by adding players in free agency and through the draft. So there are definitely a few teams you want to keep an eye on in the 2020 season. And you know what time it is? It is now time for the 2020 season to begin. Even though the off-season was different and there wasn't any off-season programs except for free agency in the NFL draft, and really there wasn't a training camp. In the training camp that there was, it wasn't the same. It was a short training camp. There wasn't a preseason. Now that we are at the regular season, it looks like the regular season's going to play out. We're just going to have to wait and see. But fast forward from the end of last season to this season, we're going to have to wait and see how the 2020 season plays out. But it is now time for the regular season to begin as of this week. And it's definitely exciting to see that NFL football has returned. And it is now time for football to begin now that we are in September. And we're going to have to wait and see what two teams make it to Super Bowl 55 and what team wins Super Bowl 55. But there will be a lot of teams contending for the playoffs, and there will be a lot of teams and some new teams being a Super Bowl contender. And we're just going to have to wait and see who wins Super Bowl 55. So now if we take a look at the Week 1 NFL schedule, now that it is time for the 2020 season to begin. Taking a look at Week 1, here are some matchups to keep an eye on this week in NFL football. The Texans versus the Chiefs on Thursday Night Football. The Jets versus the Bills. The Packers versus the Vikings. The Eagles versus Washington. The Browns versus the Ravens. The Raiders versus the Panthers. The Bears versus the Lions. The Seahawks versus the Falcons. The Chargers versus the Bengals. The Cardinals versus the 49ers. The Buccaneers versus the Saints. The Cowboys versus the Rams on Sunday Night Football, which is the debut of SoFi Stadium in Los Angeles. The Steelers versus the Giants on Monday Night Football, and the Titans versus the Broncos on Monday Night Football. So for Week 1, we have a lot of great matchups. We also have some great primetime matchups on Thursday Night Football, on Sunday Night Football, with the debut of SoFi Stadium in Los Angeles. That is one of the two new NFL stadiums that is going to open this year. Also, we have two Monday Night Football games. The Broncos also play their season opener on Monday Night Football. So for Week 1, these matchups can't get any better than that. So that is the Week 1 NFL football schedule, and that is also the matchups to keep an eye on this week in NFL football. In the preseason NFL power rankings, the current top 10 NFL football teams are the Chiefs, Ravens, 49ers, Saints, Seahawks, Buccaneers, Packers, Cowboys, Titans, and Vikings. Moving on now to NBA basketball, LeBron James passed Derek Fisher to move into first in all-time playoff wins in NBA history. LeBron James passed Ray Allen to move into second in all-time playoff three-pointers made in the playoffs. LeBron James moved into 12th in all-time blocks in the playoffs. James Harden moved into 7th in all-time three-pointers made in the playoffs. Rajon Rondo moved into 12th in all-time assists in the playoffs. Montrezl Harrell was named the NBA 2019-2020 Sixth Man of the Year. In 5 of the last 7 seasons, a Clippers player has won the Sixth Man of the Year, which includes Montrezl Harrell, Lou Williams, and Jamal Crawford. The Clippers became the second team in NBA history with 3 consecutive Sixth Man of the Year winners. Both number 1 seeds in the playoffs have lost Game 1 in the first 2 rounds of the playoffs. Jamal Murray became the franchise leader in three-pointers made in the playoffs. So right now I'm going to update you with the current schedule for the Nuggets. I'm going to tell you every team the Nuggets went up against in the last week and the final scores of those games. And I'm also going to tell you who the Nuggets go up against in the next week. So if we take a look at the Nuggets schedule, now that the Nuggets have moved on to the second round of the playoffs in the Western Conference, the Nuggets are the number 3 seed and the Clippers are the number 2 seed. And the Nuggets line it up going against the Clippers in the second round of the playoffs. In Game 1 on Thursday, September 3rd, the Nuggets lost to the Clippers 120-97. In Game 2 on Saturday, September 5th, the Nuggets beat the Clippers 110-101. In Game 3 on Monday, September 7th, the Nuggets lost to the Clippers 113-107. In Game 4 on Wednesday, September 9th, the Nuggets lost to the Clippers 96-85. So as of right now, the Clippers lead this series 3-1. Game 5 will be on Friday, September 11th. Game 6 will be on Sunday, September 13th. And Game 7 will be on Tuesday, September 15th. With the Nuggets being down 3-1 against the Clippers, the Nuggets would really have a hard time trying to come back being down 3-1 to win this series. We're going to have to wait and see if the Nuggets can win another game or if they can win the series. But if the Nuggets plan on coming back from being down 3-1 like they did against the Jazz, the Nuggets are going to have a very hard time trying to come back against the Clippers in the second round of the playoffs in the Western Conference. We're just going to have to wait and see what happens. But whatever team wins this series will be moving on to the Western Conference Finals. So that's the current schedule for the Nuggets. That's the team the Nuggets went up against in the last week, and that's the final scores of those games. And that's also who the Nuggets go up against in the next week. So right now I'm going to update you with the current NBA standings in the Eastern and Western Conference. So if we take a look at the playoffs, to start off in the Eastern Conference in the second round of the playoffs, we had the Bucks going against the Heat. And the Heat landed up winning this series 4-1, and the Heat are moving on to the Eastern Conference Finals. We had the Celtics going against the Raptors, and as of right now, this series is tied at 3, and we're going to have to wait and see what team moves on to the Eastern Conference Finals and goes against the Heat. In the Western Conference, in the second round of the playoffs, we have the Lakers going against the Rockets, and as of right now, the Lakers are leading this series 2-1. And we have the Nuggets going against the Clippers, and as of right now, the Clippers are leading this series 3-1. So that's the current NBA standings in the Eastern and Western Conference. Moving on now to NHL Hockey. So right now I'm going to update you with the current schedule for the Avalanche. I'm going to tell you who the Avalanche went up against in the last week and the final scores of those games. So if we take a look at the Avalanche schedule, now that they are playing in the second round of the Stanley Cup Playoffs in the Western Conference, we had the Avalanche going against Dallas in the second round of the Stanley Cup Playoffs in the Western Conference. And after Game 6 on Wednesday, September 2nd, the Avalanche won Game 6 against Dallas 4-1, which landed up having the series tied at 3, and Game 7 was on Friday, September 4th. And unfortunately, in Game 7, the Avalanche went against Dallas, and the Avalanche took this game against Dallas all the way into overtime. And the Avalanche did lose to Dallas in a close game, 5-4, in Game 7 in overtime on Friday, September 4th. And unfortunately, Dallas is moving on to the Western Conference Finals, and the Avalanche season has come to an end once again in Game 7 in the second round of the Stanley Cup Playoffs in the Western Conference. So right now I'm going to update you with the current NHL standings in the Eastern and Western Conference. So if we take a look at the Stanley Cup Playoffs, to start off in the Eastern Conference, now that we are in the conference finals, for the Eastern Conference Finals, we have the New York Islanders going against Tampa Bay, and as of right now, Tampa Bay is leading this series 2-0. In the Western Conference, for the Western Conference Finals, we have Las Vegas going against Dallas, and as of right now, this series is tied at 1. And now that we are in the conference finals in the Eastern and Western Conference, we're going to have to wait and see what two teams make it to the Stanley Cup Final and what team wins the Stanley Cup now that we are in the conference finals. And it's going to be interesting to see what team comes out of the Eastern Conference and what team comes out of the Western Conference. What two teams are going to go against each other in the Stanley Cup Final, and what team is going to win the Stanley Cup for this season. We're just going to have to wait and see what happens going into the next few weeks. So that's the current NHL standings in the Eastern and Western Conference. Moving on now to the Kentucky Derby. The Kentucky Derby was on Saturday, September 5th. Authentic won the 2020 Kentucky Derby. This year, the Kentucky Derby couldn't happen on the first Saturday in May due to the coronavirus pandemic. The Kentucky Derby had to wait 4 months until the first Saturday in September. The 2020 Kentucky Derby was the first Derby since 1945 and the third time in the history of the Derby that the Derby wasn't in the month of May. So for 2020, it was just great to see that the Kentucky Derby was able to happen this year. Even though it didn't happen on the first Saturday in May like it's supposed to, the Kentucky Derby was still able to happen in 2020. It just had to wait until the first Saturday in September. And with the coronavirus pandemic that is happening in 2020, it's just great to see that the Kentucky Derby was able to still happen even though it didn't take place for a few months, and it had to wait until later on this year. Hopefully in 2021, the Kentucky Derby can happen on the first Saturday in May. But in 2020, it was just great to see that the Kentucky Derby was still able to happen with the coronavirus pandemic. Even though it wasn't on the first Saturday in May, and it had to wait a few months until later on this year, it was still great to see that the Kentucky Derby was able to happen on the first Saturday in September. Even though it was a few months later, but it was great to see that the Kentucky Derby was able to happen and that they were able to crown a champion for the 2020 Kentucky Derby. Moving on now to end the show, what to watch for this week in sports. The Chiefs-Texans game on Thursday, September 10th. The Broncos season opener against the Titans here in Denver at Empower Field at Mile High on Monday, September 14th. The Broncos, NFL football, the Rockies, Major League Baseball, the NBA playoffs, the Nuggets, NBA basketball, the Stanley Cup Playoffs, Nhl Hockey, and college football. Moving on now, on the next show, I will talk about NFL football, Major League Baseball, NBA basketball, and NHL hockey. I hope you all have a great week. Tune in to the next All Sports with Gerardo show next week. I want to say thank you to everybody that listens to All Sports. Subscribe or like my pages on social media at All Sports with Gerardo. Until next time, this is Gerardo.